Growing up in nearby West Haven, I recall my first trips to Bridgeport, driving southbound over I-95, going over the bridge over the Pequannock River, seeing the sunset reflecting in the skyscrapers and banks, seeing smokestacks, factories, churning out all of this industry. The city seemed immense. It was, in fact, the largest in Connecticut, not just in population, but also in its historical impact. Bridgeport has always had a role in innovation. In 1846, Elias Howe patented the lock-stitch sewing machine. He didn't invent the machine, but it was his recommendations that made it possible for it to grow worldwide. And in fact, it was Elias Howe himself who helped to provide uniforms for much of the Northern Army during the Civil War. In 1901, Gustav Whitehead piloted his airplane 1.5 miles from Tunx's Hill in Fairfield, a full 2 years before the Wright brothers flew it a mere 852 feet, earning the real title of first in flight. During the Civil War, the Remington Arms Company and local iron foundries armed the U.S. Civil War, World War I, and even World War II. And in fact, it was these very times that the city roared to life. It was at its industrial power. I like to imagine what Bridgeport must have been like at this time. That it was factories full of people, thousands of men and women working together, hand in hand, helping each other. I think that the technology must have been so impressive. But what was most impressive about these times are the people united behind the common cause. It's that very humanity that is most important. And that wasn't always, or hasn't always been, the reputation of Bridgeport. Some folks expect bad things from the city. You might drive around yourself and see these old abandoned factories, buildings, and think of them as relics of the past. That these historical buildings are really just blight, decay. It took me some time to recognize that these elements of history are actually pictures of hope. See, I learned a thing or two about hope while traveling in Lima, Peru 20 years ago on a service trip. I recall the fear that I felt getting off the plane in the darkness, seeing fires in the street, and the silhouettes of buildings without roofs that seemed to be destroyed somehow, knocked on the inside. I remember thinking, what terrible destruction in the area. It turns out my fears were without cause. So in talking to the locals, I learned that the roofs were actually a sign of hope. That as you earned money, you bought bricks. As you bought bricks, you had the opportunity to build up, to build more rooms, a second floor, a third floor, an opportunity for your family to grow, an opportunity for hope to grow. I hold the same hope for Bridgeport. So, how do we arrive there? Workforce, technology, innovation. And those are important, but I'm particularly interested in another aspect of evolution and growth. Humanity, the connections between people. Bridgeport has always had a role in the connection between others. Bridgeport Brass created the insulated copper wire that created the first telephone lines between Boston and New York, allowing two cities hundreds of miles apart to be able to communicate with each other on a regular basis. No longer did you have to travel or rely on other means. You could pick up the phone and contact someone. In 1836, Housatonic Railroad began a railroad starting in Bridgeport and heading north towards the factories and mines in western Massachusetts, allowing critical import industry to come down through Bridgeport, connecting with the steamboats headed for New York City. This is important. This is another crucial connection between people, and Bridgeport's location made that possible. And like I said, I'm particularly interested in connection. What makes these times strange are these are times of iPads, iPhones, iTunes, me, what I want, what I need. It seems that more and more you have a lot of I and not nearly enough we. And yet connection should be easier than ever. We're long past the days of copper wire connecting phones. Our phones are connected by internet, wireless, making it just as easy for me to have a video call with my in-laws in Ukraine as it is for me to call family just a few towns away. And yet, that's not really how it works. Often you'll go out, you'll see folks sitting at a table, devices out, not paying attention. Just last night, real story, I was out to eat, and I saw what looked like a beautiful couple enjoying dinner together. I thought it was really interesting, until I realized that they weren't talking, that they were both watching different videos at the table. So if you don't connect when you're on a date, or you don't connect when you're with your friends, when do you connect? Look around the room. When was the last time you had a conversation with someone you don't know? We had the opportunity. We were here a half an hour early. And yet we don't do it. Connections should be easier now than ever. It makes me wonder, are we losing the very humanity that makes us great? In Southern Africa, there's a term that they use to govern life. It's called Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a Bantu term that roughly translates into humanity. It means a little bit, something like, I am because we are. It means that you cannot separate an individual from the community in which they were raised. This is very important. I have my successes, but I don't have my success alone, because I don't get to this spot without my parents, my 4 sisters, my neighbors, my teachers, my friends. And you have the same responsibility back to them that you have with other people. It means we're all a product of our community, and we're bound together in ways that are invisible to the eye. That means you have a responsibility. It means that my neighbor's children are my children. It means that when my aunt started chemo a month ago, my father, my uncles, my nephew, my sisters, my mom and I all got new haircuts as a show of support, so she would not be alone. Ubuntu means that my community is my family. Now, let me ask you the same question about talking to strangers. If you looked around the room and felt that you would find family in there, would you spend more time talking to them? I think you would. This is important, especially in a place like Bridgeport, especially at the University of Bridgeport, a city that is so diverse. Think about it. Caribbean, Polish, Italian, Brazilian, African American, Dominican, Puerto Rican. It would be very easy for folks to stay away from each other for fear of difference, for fear of different ideology. In UB alone, we have students from over 75 countries. On our SGA executive board, more than 20 languages are spoken. That is exceptional. If we don't take the opportunity to connect, we never will. It matters because we create lines when you have matters of difference. More and more, it seems like we're not talking about us. You're either with us or you're against us, and it shouldn't be like that. But if everyone were treated like family, if you were all united behind a common community, there would be one UB, one Bridgeport, one family. Bridgeport did something like this in 1949. They had the first Barnum Festival. Now, Barnum Festival is made to show some recognition of Barnum as a entrepreneur, as a show person. But what it really did was, in post-World War II Bridgeport, times were tough. Men were coming back from war to take jobs that the women had held so nobly in their absence. It was tough for people to go back to that. You had neighborhoods segregated by background. The Barnum Festival gave people a chance to celebrate their own culture and yet be a part of something bigger than themselves. And that's really what we're talking about. Uniting people behind a common goal, behind a common identity. And Barnum himself is an evidence of this. Most people don't realize that Barnum's success came long before the circus. In fact, he was 61 years old before he started the circus. His real success was in the American Museum and other ventures that he did before that. But it wasn't without adversity. His American Museum in downtown New York burned down, not once, but twice. And yet he still managed to recover from ruin. If he can do it, then Bridgeport can too. Science, technology, and innovation help us evolve, but it's community that makes life worth living. I ask that you don't miss the opportunity to connect with others. If you expect family, I think that you'll find that you're a part of something bigger. In March, I took 7 students to Ecuador as a part of a class where we learned about intercultural competence. I was the last to arrive, and at passport control, I was happy to be there. Finally, it took so long to travel, 11:30 at night. I started chatting with the man at passport control. He sees the purple knight on my shirt and says, "UB." I said, "Yeah, how'd you know that?" He said, "Well, I used to live in Connecticut." He said, "I lived in New Haven." I said, "Well, that makes sense. New Haven has an Ecuadorian consulate. That's great." He said, "Well, no, actually, I studied at UB. That's where I learned to speak English in 2004. I said, "Wow, that's great. We have a connection. We're talking about Bridgeport. We're talking about life at the university." He said, "I'm headed back to Connecticut soon. I think maybe this summer." He said, "My father got a green card and he moved to West Haven." I said, "That's crazy. West Haven is my hometown." I said, what part of West Haven?" He tells me the street, and I'm floored. It's the street I grew up on. He says, "My father lives at 22. I said, "My father lives at 54. I know who your father is." If I can fly halfway around the world and find a neighbor, find UB, find family, then we can certainly find it in Bridgeport. Every time we connect, you have to realize the world is a better place. Ubuntu starts with UB, but it really starts with you. Thank you.